The Middle-earth games from WB is a series that tries to reinvent the open world genre without taking too many risks, and what we are left with is a refreshing yet familiar gameplay loop. Let's talk about that. In 2014, we were introduced to our first AAA open-world game set in the Lord of the Rings universe, a franchise that was ripe for the picking in the gaming market, and still is. WB made an excellent play here, and it paid off. Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor did very well and became a classic, selling just under 1.4 million copies between the 5 platforms it launched on, and it did exceptionally well from critics as well. The launch of this game had everyone talking about some specific gameplay mechanics that were incredibly unique and unheard of. The Nemesis system introduced players to a tree of enemies and bosses distinctive to each player, making every gamer's experience different from one another. This created buzz, conversation, and attention for the title, and it was the new hot game on the block for the 2014 fall season. The Nemesis system procedurally generated enemies and bosses for each player to defeat and take on. If you're defeated, the enemy who took you down is then promoted in the ranks and moves higher and becomes even more difficult for you to kill when you meet him again. This creates little side narratives for each player and sometimes sets you on little personal vendettas to defeat a certain enemy that has been giving you trouble. Even when you defeat an enemy, it might not be the last time you see them. Let's see you kill an Uruk by fire and then they burn to death and die right before your eyes. A few hours later, you could encounter them again, and yet this time they will be scarred with burns and they will deliver unique dialogue referencing your last encounter. The only way to make sure an enemy won't return, as far as I know, are to deliver fatal blows like dismemberment. I know, brutal stuff, but it's done really well here. I mentioned earlier that the gameplay loop here is somewhat familiar, and that's mostly because the combat mechanics we received are kind of from another game. You see, this game was brought to us by WB, the same studio that gave us Batman Arkham Origins, the offbeat Arkham title that was handed over to WB to keep fans occupied while Rocksteady were working on Arkham Knight. Many of the combat mechanics we see here are more or less exactly the way we got them in the Arkham series. We get a very similar version, if not the exact same version of the free flow combat system here. The stealth, the way you stun enemies, perform finishers, it's all delivered to us exactly how we got it in the Arkham series. WB didn't even go out of their way to remap any of the controls. We also get a mode similar to the detective mode, and it's the same button that it is on the Arkham series as it is in Shadow of Mordor. And just because they reused all these things, it doesn't make it a bad game. Absolutely not. It's not a bad game. Shadow of Mordor is great, and it's very, very creative in some ways, and in other ways, it's far from creative at the same time. The fact that the Middle-earth series ripped the Arkham games combat off completely allowed them to focus on other aspects of the game, and those aspects of the game came out super refined. The free flow combat system was something that was already known and successful at the time, and at that time it was popping up in other games as well. The Assassin's Creed franchise at the time just got off the release of AC3 and Black Flag, and the combat system was there and had been there for years already. The Arkham series as well just came off Arkham City. Just because WB slid this style of combat into the game doesn't mean it's not necessarily a bad thing, but all these other games were giving us the same style of combat, so when you engaged in the grind of this game, it was fun, but it also felt very familiar. At the time, 3 unrelated AAA franchises were releasing games that all unbelievably had the same combat system. That, as a gamer, was really frustrating because, like I said, we want to switch between games to keep things fresh. And when 3 of the biggest names in gaming are all putting out titles that had similar combat systems like this, like I said, it got stale. On its own, though, Shadow of Mordor was great. It was something new to us, and like I say on the channel, that's always welcome in my book. Something new is what we want. 3 years later, we got the sequel to Shadow of Mordor, and that is Shadow of War, a successor in many ways. And as the title states, the narrative here revolves around a larger scale war that you get to partake in. And at many times, you get to fight in the front lines of this war, and it's really badass. And I really enjoy that they did this for a sequel. It opens the world up, and that's what we want. Shadow of War gives us an expansive map. The skills tree opens up and gives us tons of fun features to work toward. We get great companions and characters to play aside, awesome DLC expansions, and we get to ride dragons and raid orc encampments at the same time. Hell yeah, this is awesome. I'm revisiting Shadow of War right now, and I'm having a great time. The Middle-earth games bring me back a few years to this time where we were getting all of these games with similar combat systems, and now in 2022, it's fun to wind the clocks back a time and play a game like this, because we're not getting much like this anymore. And as Shadow of War goes deep into the lore of the universe, one mission in particular has you fighting the Nazgul all at once, and it's a really badass and enjoyable experience. Shadow of War is a good sequel, and they give us a lot of great new features and improvements to the game. You get that by trying something new and not just repeating things you've already done in the previous title. If you haven't experienced these games, give them a try, and they're really easy to get lost in while you're hunting down orcs and uruks. It's lots of fun, and it's probably a nice break from what you've been playing lately. The games look great on next-gen hardware. They play great on next-gen hardware. Just like they do on PC, it's a great experience no matter where you play them. Keep in mind, Shadow of Mordor came out on Xbox 360 and PS3, and it performed well back then. It's been 5 years since the release of Shadow of War, and there are talks about reliving Middle-earth once again, and there is another game headed our way from Monolith, and it's currently unknown if the game will be a direct continuation of Shadow of War or if it will take a different approach. There's lots of potential here to wrap up the story we were given, but I'm really excited to revisit Middle-earth once again just because of the launch of Prime's new show, The Rings of Power, and I just rewatched the original Lord of the Rings trilogy again, and I'm going to be watching the Hobbit trilogy as well, so it's really fun immersing myself in the universe through the movies and TV shows, and then through the games as well. I'd like to finish the campaign through and through and experience everything the game has to offer, and I'd like to make a separate video just on Shadow of War because it improves a lot upon Shadow of Mordor, and there is tons and tons of content, tons of DLC that I'm just reading in the menus of the game, just reading the descriptions of this DLC, and it looks awesome. So I'm trying to play all of Shadow of War, and I think I'm going to make a separate video on that for you guys, so you guys can see everything that Shadow of War has to offer. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I kind of just wanted to talk about the repetitiveness of that free flow combat system and how it ended up in an amazing game, and how that amazing game did get a lot of flack for it, but it did a lot of great things for that game as well, and the whole series of the Middle-earth series as well. I'm really enjoying these Middle-earth games right now. I'm really immersed in them, so I'd like to make more content on them for you guys, and maybe talk about some news. When we get some news headed our way about the next Middle-earth game, I'd like to talk about it here with you guys as well. If you aren't subscribed, maybe consider doing so. That way you'll catch my next video. If there are any games you want me to talk about, I'll gladly do that as well. I'm always open to trying new things, and thank you guys for watching, and happy gaming.